This is Susie of Trauma Informed Parent. I am very, very grateful to have with me here today Dr. Peter Levine. Dr. Levine is the founder of the Somatic Experiencing Trauma Institute. He has been working in the field of stress and trauma for over 40 years and has written a number of valuable books, including Trauma Through a Child's Eyes, which happens to be a personal favorite. Thank you, Dr. Levine, for joining me.
Sure.
A lot of followers on the page are parents and caregivers of kids who have suffered early trauma. And while there's a lot of information right now during the pandemic on how to help children in general with anxiety, we haven't seen a lot specifically geared towards kids who have endured trauma. And when I knew I'd be talking to you, I asked some followers what they might like to ask you. And a number have said that they have children and teenagers who've endured early childhood trauma, such as sexual abuse, or their foster kids, a lot of different traumas. Medical trauma came up a couple of times actually, and they're saying they're seeing their kids regressed and somewhat dysregulated, and they're in talk therapy, but it's not quite enough. For parents who aren't
you mean the children are in therapy? Is that what you're saying?
The children are in therapy, but it's not quite talk therapy, not quite doing it. For those who don't know exactly what somatic experiencing is, can you give a brief overview and then maybe some suggestions on what parents and caregivers to do when they see this happening?
Sure. Well, when I began my journey with trauma, at that time, well, this was in the late 60s and then into the early 70s, I didn't know because the definition of trauma as PTSD hadn't occurred yet. And so I was, in a way, fortunate to not know that trauma was a brain disorder, a brain disease that at best could be managed by drugs and changing one's thoughts. So I had free reign. And one of the things I discovered is that when we are experiencing threat, or even mortal threat, not just our brains, but our bodies react in specific ways. We tighten against, our guts turn and get twisted up. We feel nauseous and weak and exhausted and angry, for no apparent reason. And I'm sure that people are noticing that with their kids. But what I discovered in developing somatic experiencing, by the way, thank you for saying 40 years. The last interviewer said 50 years. You make me feel younger.
I'm glad.
So anyhow, what I discovered was that until these sensations in the body shifted, the trauma remained there and was recycled and recycled and recycled. So when you have people, whether it's adults or children, that have had previous trauma, and you have a situation like this, where you have this virus that many children can't really understand. And it means that everything that they were used to, like being in school, being with classmates, with friends, almost overnight has been altered. And it's very disturbing for kids, because kids really do need to have a specific routine. So things really have changed dramatically there. I think that the news I will tell you about trauma, maybe the bad news first, is that it's a fact of life. The good news is it doesn't have to be a life sentence. And even in situations like this, I think parents can do things with their kids that can really help them move through this fear. Because again, if you just think about it, this is something that's, well, in terms of our evolution, our nervous systems were designed to notice the possibility of threat in the environment, and then to assess it, and then to respond with either flight or with fight. With something like this virus, there is no object. It's something that could be everywhere. It's not like the parents, so it makes it more difficult. And children will regress to earlier stages, especially kids who have had, trauma over their lifetime. But again, there are things that parents can do that are really important. And and they do have to do with helping children learn about what's going on in their bodies and changing that. And one of the things when you do this bottom-up processing, things can really shift.
I think I saw you say in another interview, new experiences in the body that contradict fear and helplessness.
Exactly.
That was great.
Exactly. So you want children to be able to have that. And probably a lot of kids are kind of tuned out. You know, they may be playing games or, you know, that kind of thing. But it's their way of dealing with the stress.
Yes.
But we need to also get them moving. That's really important because movement is the opposite of paralysis.
Mm-hmm.
So especially being confined to home, you know, not allowed to do all the things that your children have been doing in the past, you know, they just say, that's too much. So one of the exercises I have to do with adults with each other, but it's at least equally useful for parents and children, is then they take turns to just move their bodies in any way that they want, any way that they want. So if they want to move like this, they move like that. So, and then the job of the other person, say the child, is to mirror them.
Mm.
So you're actually starting, and then of course, vice versa. When the children are moving, then you're mirroring them. I mean, it's like you're literally are a mirror.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way to, again, get them moving, get them engaged.
Great.
You know, another thing is use of drawing. When I would work with children sometimes, I would get 2 pads and then a bunch of crayons, and we would draw something, maybe about, you know, what our life is like now,
Mm-hmm.
what it was like before, what you imagine the life can be afterwards, later.
Mm-hmm.
And then to draw those and then to talk about them. So kind of drawing and talking about the drawings,
Yep.
you know, it's another way. Also getting kids just to jump up and down, you know, and when you do that, you have a new experience in your body, which can be, you know, jumping for joy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's, you know, that's just not an idle thing. It's a very real thing. So sometimes put on music and then parents and the child dancing together, jumping together, even in place. Those things can make such a difference, and they're so easy to do.
They are, and they're not a go-to. Most people won't think I should be jumping right now, but it's not an automatic go-to. But
Exactly.
being reminded of that is great. And I've had a lot of parents and caregivers say they don't have time to read lengthy articles about how to help or watch, you know, hour-long videos. So these concise tools are really, really helpful.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I wanted to give you just some very simple things that parents can do.
Yep. Is there anything, can you get it wrong? Is there any things not to do?
You know, I mean, not really. These things are pretty safe. Another exercise that's really fun, and usually children will engage on this. You know, we talked about what happens when we experience this overwhelming threat, the way our bodies respond. Our guts twist, we feel collapse. And this is an exercise, again, to practice. I suggest that parents practice this by themselves first so they get the hang of it. But the idea is, again, you have this, not again, there's a nerve that goes from the brain stem down into the guts, called the vagus nerve. It's the largest nerve in the body. And so when you see something scary or perceive something scary, again, kids, when they're watching television, and this is going on over and over, you know, when I worked with families after 9/11, when the planes crashed, the parents had these news on literally 24 hours a day. And so the kids would see the airplanes crashing every 5 minutes, and they thought that this was still happening.
I remember kids were little then. I remember turning off the TV, but I had friends who did not. And
Exactly. So you've got to do that. If you want to watch the TV, do it after they're in bed, after they're asleep. I can't overstate that. It really is really important. And so that they know, depending on their age, what the facts are, that this won't go on forever, that it is scary, I mean, you really have to validate the kids' feelings. That's essential. And that they're going to be taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because kids hear that some of the parents are dying and so forth,
Yeah.
and you know, I'm very healthy, and we're going to be okay.
Okay.
We're going to be okay.
How about though for parents? There's a lot of parents on who follow Trauma Informed Parent who have had trauma themselves.
Ah,
Um,
right.
what
Well,
about
let me give
adults?
you this exercise because
Okay.
that's a good way to illustrate it. But you know, in the airplane, in the days when you could go on an airplane, at the beginning, you know, they say, you know, in the unlikely event of a depressurization, the mask will come down. If there's a child sitting next to you, put the mask on your face first, and then give them the mask. So we have to take care of ourselves first. That's essential. So here's an exercise that can help people come out of the shutdown and the fear by working with this vagus nerve. Because again, remember, this nerve goes to all of the organs below our diaphragm, particularly our gastrointestinal system. So when we've been traumatized, we feel like yuck. And that yuck, because this nerve, the majority of the fibers in this nerve are actually taking information from the guts, from the viscera, and relaying it to the brain. So when you have this yuck, that yuck gets transmitted back, goes from the brain to the stomach and the intestines. It goes yuck. That goes back up to the brain and gets amplified. So we have yuck, 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 and it seems like that's going to go on forever.
Mm-hmm.
So here's an exercise that allows us to have a new signal coming from our guts, a new signal that contradicts those feelings of yucky, overwhelming helplessness.
Okay.
So the idea is to take an easy, full breath, and most kids will like this because it's sort of like you can make games out of it. An easy, full breath, and on the exhalation, to make the sound voo, as though it's coming from the belly. So vibrating it right in the belly. So and let the breath and the sound go all the way out. And then wait, just allow the new breath to come in. Join if you like. And then allow the breath coming in, belly, chest. And just notice sensations. What kind of sensations, physical sensations are you experiencing in your body, Susie?
Grounding.
You feel grounded, more grounded.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's important, obviously, because this can unground us, all of this uncertainty.
I
So
can vouch for this because I had read this before from you and actually used it one night during a middle of the night panic attack. I have to say it helped.
Yes. You know, sometimes it can really just switch things so quickly. Here's another part of it, again, to practice with yourself and your friends or your partner if the partner is living there. And this is now bringing in the jaw with the voo sound. So it's sort of like making animal sounds and just opening the mouth just till they feel the resistance and then letting it close a little bit and then letting it open again. I'll demonstrate. And if you were an animal, what kind of an animal would you be?
You mean asking kids what kind
Yes,
of animal?
yes.
Yes.
And so again, that lets them bring in that creative part of themselves.
I would think this would be useful for teachers as well, because somebody did ask me to ask you how teachers can support and nurture, and I would think these
Oh,
would be
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, can you imagine doing that in a class, even if it's a virtual classroom?
Yeah.
But to do that together, you know, it really, you know, they talk about social isolation, and that bothers me. Social, because it's we want physical isolation or physical distancing, I mean, but with social connection in
Mhm.
whatever form we can get it. That's really essential to
Yes.
our well-being. I mean, we are hardwired to be with other people. That's how our nervous systems are worked, and that actually helps us to regulate. The VU exercise can help us regulate. This really getting the aggression, getting that energy, that liveness moving, because kids, most kids, even kids that have been traumatized, have this part of them that is very alive. And you were mentioning teachers.
Mhm.
The book that you showed, Trauma Through a Child's Eyes, has a number of chapters, especially geared for teachers and for mental health providers that work with kids. There's another book I hope to mention, which can be very helpful for the parents, where these kinds of exercises are there. And it's a short book, it's just a couple hundred pages. And it's called Trauma Proofing Your Kids, a Parent's Guide for Instilling Confidence, Joy, and Resilience. And when you help a child move through one of these trauma states, they become more empowered, more resilient, more engaged.
Yes. Yes.
I really recommend that, especially for the parents, because there's, again, a lot of different exercises that you can do together with kids. Another one we haven't talked about is reading together with children.
Mm.
Finding a book that they like. Again, obviously, this depends on their age. And reading together. With all of the media stuff, we don't tend not to do this very much anymore.
Right.
And it's very important because, it really establishes a sense of connection. I was so fortunate with my godchildren, and I think they were fortunate with me, because I would come and read with them a lot. And it made such a difference in the quality that they offer then to the world.
Yes.
It's really something. I think of my godson Jacob. He was in school and in grade school, and they were bullying this kid.
Mm.
And he went up and he said, "This is not okay. This is wrong. This is not okay." And the bullies were just so startled, and they stopped.
Wow.
So again, we want to cultivate healthy children, irrespective of the trauma that they've had. And again, I really suggest this book because it has a lot of information on very practical things that parents.
Yes, I've read Trauma Through Child Eyes and Waking the Tiger, and I would highly recommend anything that you've written. What about teenagers, though, who might be reluctant to do
Yes,
some of these things?
exactly. Teenagers. Often people ask me, well, how do you do this with teenagers? How do you work with teenagers? Because they're not interested in this kind of stuff. And actually, that's not the experience I have. That when you find a way to engage teenagers, to engage them in their language, that they also really, not all the time, but they will tend to engage. So again, doing the kind of things like the movement and the mirroring and the growling.
Mm.
And sometimes I'll have, along with the growling, just offer a resistance for the child's hands or arms and have them push into you. And so they are able to feel their strength and push and actually even make a boundary. So
Wow.
I would try things like that with teenagers. I would, and if they're on the internet and games, we do have to set limits. We really do. And unfortunately, in the child rearing practices today, parents have had a lot of problems in setting boundaries with kids. And, when I was born and was a baby, we were told by the experts to not breastfeed the children because that could spread disease, and to never pick them up when they were crying, because then they would learn to control you. So that was a very serious, poor and wrong information to give.
Definitely.
Now, what I see is parents being afraid to set boundaries with their kids and to say, no, this is not okay. To still love them and to still let them know they're cared for and loved, but in setting the boundary. Parents, I think, want to be the child's best friend.
Yes.
And children don't need the parents. They don't want the parents to be their best friends. They want the parents to be their parents.
Yes, I think we veered too far the other direction.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. We just tend to swing from one extreme to another, and that's very characteristic of what happens.
I learned I was doing that the hard way, so I understand.
Yes, exactly. Because when you do that, you see, then the kids become more and more aggressive, not in a good way, but they just say, don't tell me what to do. And you see this again in the country where these people are saying, don't tell us what to do. And they're coming in like to the state capitals with assault weapons.
Yep.
I mean, this is total lunacy.
Yep.
But again, this is how that kind of trajectory develops with kids of not setting boundaries. And
I think it's hard when you've had a child who's suffered trauma.
Yes.
And that's where, you tend to overcompensate and like, well, we've got to protect them because they've suffered so much. However, the boundaries are even more important then, I think.
That's right. You said it better than I could. You really get that balance, and it will work. It may take a little doing, and again, of course, if kids are there from foster and they've had, all kinds of trauma in their lives, it makes things much more difficult, of course.
Sure.
But again, most kids like to do some of these exercises, like the growling and the pushing.
Yeah.
One of the people that I'm doing some webinars together with, the people from this program called Theraplay. And they do really good work. Actually, the way they work with children is in a lot of ways very similar to the way I work with kids. So we're going to start teaching some classes together. Okay. But again, it really is about engaging the child in different ways, in active ways. Let them feel their strength. Let them feel their power.
Yes, and it's simply jumping or pushing or just using sounds.
Right. And if you're concerned, because some of the children might be really over, angry and pushing, you can still hold the pillow up to the wall and then have them push into the pillow while they're making their row.
Like that.
Yeah. So but if you do it together, it's kind of nice because you can connect with what I call the healthy aggression, and then use that. Then that will lead to contact, the desire for contact, for social engagement. Again, remember, physical separation for sure.
Yes.
Physical boundaries for sure, but not social isolation.
Well, where you said that you feel this is a time of great change for everybody. In terms of how kids are developmentally going to, move on from this, especially kids who have had trauma, fast forward a few years, what do you see playing out because of all this?
Yeah, I mean, we're dealing with a lot of unknowns. But I think, and I don't want to overpaint a rosy paint the picture. But I think if we come together as families, as friends, as communities, with our children, I think that we will have a much healthier society. I really do. It may not happen all at once. And the other thing, I don't know if I mentioned it, that we have to tell their children is that this virus will go away. We don't know exactly when. Again, it gives them a sense of a timeline. That's also important for kids because when they feel this trauma, it feels like the future will be no different than the past.
Right.
That's the nature of trauma.
Yeah.
And so if they have at least some idea of when they might be going back to school, of when they might be able to play with their kids. Say that they don't know for sure, but this is what we know now. And that's what our leaders should be doing with us, but they're not doing it. You know, there were exceptions. The previous president, he could really be there and empathize, but also, to tell people what we know and what we don't know. Another person I think about is Walter Cronkite.
Yes.
He would tell the facts, what we know, what we don't know. And when Kennedy died, he gave the facts, but then the tears came and he let himself be with the nation with the tears. We don't have that kind of leadership now, but the parents are the leadership.
Yes. Yes, they are. And I think you made a good point there in not being afraid to be vulnerable. And just because we don't have a leader who can't do that doesn't mean we don't have, parents who can't do that and, be able to be vulnerable in these moments.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Dr. Levine. Is there anything else?
No, I think that's the main idea. And from what I've heard about your organization, keep up the good work.
Thank you. And if people want to find out more about you, should they go to traumahealing.org?
Yes, they can do that. Yes, if they want to find therapists in their area, because we offer trainings now in 42 countries.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so the website is traumahealing, one word, .org.
Okay, we will do that.
And that's a really good resource for practitioners, and also if some of the people we're talking to are professionals, for their training programs, which, if I might say so myself, are excellent.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Levine. This is Susie of Trauma Informed Parent. Thanks for tuning in.